Well, welcome to Hot Issues. This week there's going to be a little change in the format. My producers tell me that we're going to have two segments, and that is because of the topic that we're going to discuss. This week we're looking at the Millennium Challenge account, looking at Compact 1, Compact 2. What does it mean? Does this signify an improvement in the relations between Ghana and the United States of America? Problems with energy, coming to an end? What will be the overall impact of this program on the national development effort? And I promise you would not be disappointed. Two of the persons who know what it's all about will be talking to us from the studio. We have two segments of this discussion. Welcome to Hot Issues. Welcome back to Hot Issues. As I indicated from the beginning, we're going to look at the Millennium Challenge account. What is it all about? What is Compact 1? What is Compact 2? What would be the overall impact of this on the national development effort? And as I said from the beginning, we're going to have two segments in this program. The first segment is a conversation with the country team manager of the Millennium Challenge account, Deidre Fair James. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you so much for having me here.
What is the Millennium Challenge account?
Sure. The Millennium Challenge Corporation is a U.S. government corporation that was established in 2004 to work with countries on economic growth programs. And Ghana has been a partner with MCC since our inception. As many of your viewers know, we funded a first compact, or grant, because these are grant funds, in the agricultural transportation sector that dealt with transition to high-value agriculture. That compact ended in 2012, and in 2011, so right before that compact ended, the government of the United States selected Ghana, or MCC, selected Ghana to develop a second program. And we've been working with a team from the government of Ghana, headed by Professor Safadede, on that program since then. And 2 weeks ago, we signed that grant agreement for $498 million for MCC. There's also a government contribution, so a total program of $535 million focused on the power sector.
What is Compact 1 and how is that different from Compact 2?
So Compact 1, which was the program that was signed in 2006, it started implementing in 2007 and then finished in 2012, was focused, as I mentioned before, on the agriculture sector, and then also transportation and other ancillary activities related to transition to high-value agriculture. With the second compact, the government chose, after lots of analysis and stakeholder consultation, to focus on improving the reliability and quality of power in Ghana for economic growth. So that's the main difference, two different sectors, also back-to-back.
High-value agriculture and transportation. Specifically, what are we talking about?
Sure, there were programs related to, I think the one that people know the most is the N1 George Walker Bush Highway that we have in the city, but there are also several other projects. There were ferries that were built and are operational now from planes. There were irrigation schemes. There were farmer training schemes as well as part of the project. And so overall, we believe that the government did a good job of implementing that program. Their continued performance on the policy measures that we seek to ensure that our partners are focused on Ghana continued that good performance, and that's why in 2011 our MCC board selected Ghana to develop a second compact.
How much was spent on the first compact?
The first compact, the grant was $547 million. And that had to be spent within that 5-year period. That's actually part of our legislation. We cannot have programs go over 5 years. Part of MCC's legislation.
Now, how come that the second compact gives us much less than the first compact?
Well, with
498.2
million. Actually, with second compact countries, all of the countries, and actually there are not that many that are actually selected again to develop compacts, those countries are required to contribute 7.5% of the total program amount. And so the total program amount for this compact is actually very close to the $547 million. It's just shy of $535 million.
What's your assessment of the first compact?
In terms of the first compact, we think that Ghana successfully implemented that compact, that program, because if they hadn't, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because they wouldn't be selected for a second compact. And I think around the country, and particularly in Accra, you can see some of the results.
What are some of the results?
I think, again, seeing transportation corridors, the congestion in transportation corridors eased by the N1 highway and by some of these ferries, and then also some of the facilities related to cold storage, and also some of the rural roads. I know sometimes we get focused on the N1, but there were also some rural road projects that helped to transform people's lives in these areas that were formerly cut off.
How come that the concentration has been on the N1 rather than on feeder roads and so on?
Sure. So we did fund feeder roads, I think, because that was such a big project and it's here in Accra and that's what people see. I suspect that's the case.
Because I would have thought that if you wanted to improve agricultural transportation, N1 really is not it.
Well, those trucks that are carrying foodstuffs have to get from the rural areas into the city and into the airport and into the port at Tema. So not sitting in traffic for 3 hours, congested traffic for 3 hours can save you time, and money.
But feeder roads could keep them on the road for 3 days.
I agree, and that's why we also looked at feeder roads as well. We also supported feeder roads as part of the project. And I would encourage everyone who really wants to understand what the objectives were of the compact and what was achieved to look at the compact completion report. It's on MCC's website. It's about an 11-page report, and it's there for all to read if they so choose.
Very, very few people can go to the website.
There are some challenges, but then you also have the Millennium Development Authority office and Heritage Tower. And they can also...
How about making that available to the media, so that you can publish it, you can broadcast it to a wider audience?
Point taken.
Now, are there some conditionalities? Did we have to meet some conditions to qualify for the first compact and the second compact?
So overall, MCC selects countries that meet certain criteria in terms of governance, economic freedom, and investing in people. And as I mentioned before, Ghana has met those criteria the 10 years that MCC has been in existence, and they've been one of our long-standing partners. In terms of the second compact, when we were developing the program in partnership with Professor Sepedede's team and also plenty of stakeholders, we asked the question, why is there a problem with power? And as I mentioned before the break, I've had the pleasure of coming back and forth with Ghana, living here some years ago, and then coming back and forth for the last 18 years. And we recognize these problems persist, and it's not just a money issue. So really understanding what's impeding additional investment in generation, and then also what is impeding investment in the system so it runs reliably and can provide power. And so the terms of the compact track that. So we recognize in order for investors to want to build generation plants, also including VRA, they want to get paid for the power that they are going to produce and sell. So you have to have a financially viable and efficient utility. And so one of the terms of the compact is related to the government paying for the power that was consumed to ensure that ECG is financially viable. So that's just an example of how, when we looked at the terms of the compact, we wanted to match the challenge that we were trying to solve.
So what was that challenge? Government not paying for electricity?
Sure. No, there are several. It's a multifaceted problem, and as we see, it's not going to take a simple answer, and that's why the program focused on a holistic approach. And I know that a lot of the press has been focused mostly on ECG, and that is a big part of the project. But we're looking at not just ECG, but also NEDCO, addressing the regulatory issues, also looking at access to power for SMEs, looking at how to create an enabling environment for additional generation, as well as energy efficiency and demand-side management. And so it's not just one institution's fault. There's a collection of actors in the sector, including consumers, that are responsible for turning the situation around.
So what are the concrete proposals on the ground for dealing with all these problems that you've identified?
Sure. The first one, and I'll start with the obvious, is that there must be a financially and operationally viable distribution utility, or really distribution utilities, because you have two here, in order for this sector to work, for people to invest in generation, but then also to be able to bring in, to have a reliable fuel supply. So the first two projects, there's an ECG turnaround project and a NETCO turnaround project. And then there's a regulatory strengthening project to provide capacity building to PURC, so to strengthen their ability to regulate the sector, and then also set tariffs that are based on efficient, reliable electricity. There's also a project focused on improving access for SMEs, so looking at what are some of the barriers to legal access for these small and medium enterprises, especially in markets and economic enclaves. And then there is a project related to how do you ensure reliable fuel supply? How do you create that environment to make sure the roles and responsibilities of the various sector entities are clear, that there is transparent and competitive procurement of power as well, and there's proper sector planning, so 10 years from now, 25 years from now, how much power you're going to need and where should that go. And then lastly, but definitely not least, we recognize, again, to build a power plant takes a couple of years, but there are things that can be done now in order to bring some of that demand off the grid, and so you can have fewer blackouts. So that's the demand side management, energy efficiency. How do we use energy more wisely, especially in government facilities, which is one of the focuses of that project.
Can we talk bluntly?
Yes, please.
All this, what does it mean?
Sure.
An advocacy for privatization?
What it means, it's actually funding for infrastructure, improved infrastructure, to reduce technical losses and some commercial losses within ECG and NETCO. So these are substations and wires and systems. But the bigger issue is, how do you ensure that you have the accountability and incentives in these distribution utilities? And so they run in a financially and operationally sustainable manner. They collect.
There's only one distribution utility. That's the Electricity Company of Ghana.
There's NETCO. Don't forget NETCO in the north. They are key to economic growth in the north.
So we're talking basically about ECG and NETCO.
Exactly, because we're looking at supporting both of those institutions. But to get back to your point about ECG, of course, they've over 2 million customers. They are the electricity supplier for some of the biggest cities in Ghana, and ensuring that they're able to provide that reliable electricity is key. But again, it's about efficiency, customer service, collecting the bills, collecting the money for the electricity that you bill, ensuring that there's proper billing, and ensuring you have operational efficiency down the chain.
Is privatization part of the condition?
Part of the condition is to bring in private sector participation in distribution. And I think it's important at this point to say that this is part of a continuum of power sector reform in Ghana. The government of Ghana embarked on this process in the mid-90s. And it started with the creation of an independent regulator, PURC. And then there was the unbundling of VRA and GridCo as generation and transmission. There was the invitation for private sector companies to come in and build generation for IPPs. And the next step in that evolution is also to bring private sector into distribution, to bring efficiencies and also capital into the system. And so anyone who comes in and is going to inject significant amounts of capital into distribution, if you bring in a private sector partner, is going to want to make sure that it's efficient. There are different ways that one can do this. You can do this, there are examples around the continent. You look at Kenya, for instance. They have a PPP, a public-private arrangement for their utility. In Uganda, they've chosen to go for a long-term concession with a company. In Cote d'Ivoire, they have a leasing arrangement. So there are examples that we can point to around the continent where you have been able to drive. It may not be perfect. They still have their challenges, but you're able to drive efficiencies because you have different incentives and accountability as part of that arrangement. And so that's what we're seeking to encourage Ghana to continue moving on that reform path as part of the Compact. And again, I would like to say that everything in the terms in the Compact are part of really an affirmation of government policy that's already there. We want to support the implementation of that policy. In 5 years, of course, because that's what we have.
The United States itself may serve as a very interesting example. Mm-hmm. There are many huge private companies which are going bust.
Yes.
Which are suffering from inefficiency.
Yes.
We need government bailout and so on.
That's true. And it's
so private sector participation doesn't necessarily assure efficiency
You're correct.
and good performance.
It's not a panacea. I agree. There are private sector companies, not just in the United States, but around the world, that are not efficient, don't have the right incentives and accountability, and go bust. But I think there is a recognition in Ghana that we need to continue the reforms and we need to try a new path.
So what are you doing in the second compact? You're focusing on energy.
Power, right.
Beyond power, beyond the reforms, of the regulatory bodies, beyond the strengthening of NEDCO and ECG and so on. What concretely is being done?
Sure.
Are you providing resources for private investors to invest? Are you building power plants? What is it that you're doing?
The focus of the infrastructure investments, again, is on the distribution side. Based on the feasibility studies that were done as part of the Compact, but also even before, it's recognized that the distribution utilities require a couple $100 million a year. Estimates around $200 million a year of investment needs to go in the network to meet current and future demand. Where's that funding going to come from? MCC has part of the funding, but we don't have all of the funding. There are donors who are also working in the sector, and they can bring funding into the sector. The government, it's more of a challenge, but even with government resources, you still need to inject significant amounts of capital. Where is that going to come from?
It's easy.
Where is that?
If we can stop the mining companies from retaining 98% of their the total amount of money they generate in the economy, will have more than enough to jack up the energy sector.
It is going to take everybody. It's going to take the consumers. It's going to take investors to make this sector work.
But Ghana has the capacity to solve the problems of the power sector.
I agree.
Just by being a little more,
efficient.
if you excuse my language, sensible.
Yes. And we want to encourage sensibility, people being sensible and also being efficient.
Now, what is your outlook for Compact 2? Where do you see us going at the end of Compact 2?
Sure. As part of the Compact, in what we call Annex 3, this is the monitoring and evaluation indicators. We, along with the government and other stakeholders, have worked very diligently to think about how are we going to manage success at the end of this Compact. And so there are a set of indicators that we will use to monitor how we're doing throughout the Compact, but also if we've been successful at the end of the Compact. And some of the key indicators include reduced outages, unplanned outages and faults, increased investment in generation, also increased reinvestment in the network. And those are just a few. So we'll know that we're successful if we can sit here 5 or so years from now and be able to say, here are the numbers. This is where we were at the beginning, and this is where we are at the end.
You're very satisfied with how we dealt with Compact 1.
As I mentioned before, if it wasn't satisfactory, I wouldn't be sitting here. So, but I think the most important part that you mentioned is implementation. We recognize that the Compact, we'd like to think, it does reflect the partnership we've had over the last 3 years, and it seeks to address the key issues. But
I was very optimistic about
implementation. I am optimistic about. I believe in Ghana and Ghanaians, and there is a track record with Compact 1 of implementing a compact under challenging circumstances. I was here when some of the projects were being built, and I know there were some people saying, this is never going to happen at the end of 5 years. It's never going to happen. And the team came through. And so I believe there will be an excellent team that will be hired for this second compact. And MCC will have a small staff, 2 or 3 staff that will be located at our MCC office at the U.S. Embassy, and we'll be working closely with the team as well to support the implementation efforts, because we all want to see Ghana win.
There are some economic indicators that appear to be quite worrying. The massive devaluation of the national currency, the rate of inflation, the gross domestic product is not growing fast enough, and so on. How would all of this impact on the project?
I will say if the power sector issues aren't addressed, it will make the situation worse. because we see how the lack of reliable power and the outages impact business and impact not just existing business but also future business prospects. So we recognize that there are challenges, but we also recognize that if we're not part of the solution, by supporting the country's efforts to ensure reliable supply, then it's not a good thing. We should be part of the solution.
Well, viewers, this is only the first segment of a two-segment discussion on the Millennium Challenge account and how it's going to impact on developments in Ghana. And we've been in conversation with Deidre Fair-James, who is the country leader for Campact 2. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for coming.